Welcome, everyone, to our June Lunch and Learn webinar series. We're excited to have you with us today. Before we begin, we have some exciting news to share. Over the past year, our chapter has been working through a name change to better reflect and represent the full scope of our membership, including our valued members in the Buffalo area. We are pleased to announce that we are now officially rebranded as ISM Western New York. We'll be sharing more details with our membership in the coming week, so please stay tuned. Now, let's get started with today's program. We encourage everyone to participate. Please feel free to share your questions and comments using the chat box throughout the session. Thank you for joining us, and let's dive in. Our speaker for today will be Brandon Hummons. And Brandon, thank you for coming back to our chapter today and to all of our guests today. Brandon has both his CPSM and a CPSD and his own consulting business, Hummons Consulting. At this point, I'm going to turn the program over to you, Brandon, where you can give a more in-depth detail about your background.
Sure. And once again, thank you so much, Kathy, for inviting me back. It's always wonderful to work with your chapter. For those that don't know me, I am part of ISM Chicago's chapter. I'm on their board of directors, and I handle all of our education and university connection style events. So anything that deals with teaching people or connecting people with the knowledge that we produce, it's really my goal. As Kathy said, I have my own consulting company called Hummons Consulting, and that is where I do all of my teaching. And then you also may notice Valorant Consulting, and that is where I do all of my project-based work. So I think that in order to teach properly, I need to be in the field, boots on the ground, working with different companies and making sure that I'm on top of everything fresh in the procurement world. I have been a procurement practitioner for about 13, 14 years now, where I started my career off at Allstate and I started my own company in 2018. So I've been running that one for about almost 7, 8 years now or so. So you're all here to add another tool to your procurement tool belt in terms of negotiation. And I want to talk to you about the ability and the strength that comes with being able to walk away and then actually walking away. Not only that, but I'm going to talk about what happens when you do walk away and how to handle those situations with a lot of tact and grace. So let's just dive right into a few things here. When we talk about walking away, we don't look at this as a cowardly thing or that you've lost the negotiation. It's more a strategic retreat that you can take advantage of where you're doing this at a moment where it is going to be extremely beneficial to your own outcomes. What does that mean for us? Well, it means that we're employing this technique in certain situations where other things may not work. Maybe you're at the end of what you believe is what you can accomplish for that contract negotiation. Maybe you have a supplier that is just completely unwilling to budge. This is when we pull out this strategy. There's always a way to get exactly what you want. It just depends on the tools that you're going to use in order to get there. So let me give you guys just a quick example. I bought a car recently. Not to brag, right? But I previously had a 2016 Toyota, right? That's what I had, and it was running fine. I loved it. It was reliable, but it was in need of replacement, to say the least. A few dinks on there and whatnot. I have two kids, so you can imagine what the back seat started to look like. I wanted an SUV. And I knew exactly the type that I wanted, and I knew where I wanted to go to get it. This is a particular car dealership that I had been to several times before, and they had just started this new car program where they would also work with you on short-term purchases where you would be able to trade in your car 3 years later. So think of it almost like a purchase but lease option, right? Where they guarantee to maintain a certain minimum level of value on the car for when you want to trade it in. So that's why I was going to this particular dealership. But mind you, remember before I said my car that I had, that 2016 Toyota, it still worked, right? I didn't need a new car, but I really, really wanted it. When I went in there, I told them, here's the car I want. Here's how much I want to pay per month. I don't care what we have to do to get me there, but here are the number of months that I want on this lease. I laid out all of the financials that I wanted, right? The situation that happened from there is they showed me the car. Well, they showed me quite a few different options. The first one they put me in was an upsell. And I said to him, I don't know why we're driving this car when I told you the car that I wanted. I don't need all these extra bells and whistles that you guys are putting right here in front of me. It's not necessary. Let's get me to the car that I actually want. They put me in that car that I liked. I signed one document. I signed a verification of insurance, right? So I'm making sure that my current insurance is moving over to the other car. Now, the thing is, telling them where I wanted my numbers to be and how they were pushing me to upsell on every opportunity, I could tell that these guys were in it for the profit, right? And I wasn't budging. I wasn't trying to pay more per month. I wasn't trying to extend the lease agreement, or not the lease, the purchase agreement to where I was paying 72 months, right? I wasn't willing to do any of that. But they knew, and I already had my bank statements printed out, right? So they knew what was in my bank account. They knew all of the details. They knew my credit score that I had just printed out right before that, right? So the qualifications were there. The situation that happened next was after I signed that form that said I have insurance and we can transfer this on over, they said, you know what, Brandon, it's late, and it was. It was about 9:30 at night by that point, and I had arrived right after work, so it was like 6 o'clock when I arrived. So we had already been talking for over 3 hours, right? A lot of that time spent waiting, a lot of that time spent going back and forth, negotiating, pulling up different programs, me comparing it to the other cars that should have been at a similar price and what those payments were. And I'd even received another offer, right? Well, rather another package at another dealership for a very similar vehicle, right? So I already had even a comparative offer from another dealership. I had all the ducks in a row. At 9:30, I said, you know what? I've signed this. They said, Brandon, you've already moved your stuff from your previous car over into the new car, right? I was ready to walk out, ready to sign those papers. They said, take the car, come back tomorrow. We'll finish signing the paperwork. We'll be fine. I said, well, tomorrow doesn't really work, guys. I have XYZ to do. Can I come back Monday? You guys are closed Sunday. Saturday doesn't work. I'll be back Monday right after work. I come back Monday, right after, like I had said, it's about 6 o'clock once again. And they say, well, Brandon, we also told you that we were going to detail the car. So do you mind taking everything out the car and sitting down with the manager again? I said, okay, sure, but this is a little strange that you guys are having me pull every single thing out. I'm talking about, I had my son's picture on the dashboard. They said, make sure you take the picture out. And so I said, something's wrong here. There's something that you guys aren't telling me. They sit me down and they say, well, Brandon, um, we love everything. You qualify for it. Your credit is on point. You have the down payment. But in order to get you to exactly where you want to be with monthly payments, we're going to need you to put down 3,000 more dollars. I said, well, I put down the $500 that we agreed to in the beginning. Why do you need another 3,000? And they said, well, in order for us to get everything exactly how you want it, we just need that $3,000 more. I said, no, I took all my stuff out the car, put it back into my old car that was in the spot where I left it on that dealership, and I drove away. I didn't have any more words for him, didn't talk to him. I said, you did not honor what we agreed to, and I don't like this tactic, and it doesn't make me feel good as a potential customer of yours. I'm leaving. I left, and as soon as I get home, they call me back. I said, all right, Brandon, instead of 3,000, can you put down 1,500? I said, I can put down 3,000, but I won't. We agree to these numbers, and I'm not deviating away from that agreement. They say, well, okay, Brandon, that's fine, that's fine. Um, I guess we'll figure out if we can make it work. I said, you guys figure it out. I'm fine. I hang up the phone. The next day, they call back again. Brandon, can you put down 1,000 more dollars? Then we can have everything working exactly the way that we agreed to in the beginning. I said, no, we didn't agree to that. I said $500. You guys have my $500 that I'm expecting a refund for, and I'm ready to move on. They said, okay, Brandon, hung up the phone again. They called back again the next day. Said, Brandon, what about just 500 more dollars? And I said, so we went from 3,000 all the way down to an additional $500. What am I getting if I do this larger deposit? And they said, well, you get the car, the terms that you want. And I was like, no, we already agreed to the terms that I want the very first time. Apparently, let me get this straight. Did you not have the authority and the agency to agree to those terms that you striked up before? If this is also the case, why would you let me drive away with the car? And clearly, he let me do that because that is a sales tactic. He wanted me to further fall in love with the product. Long story short, I agreed on an additional $500 down payment or a few extra additions to that original agreement, such as an extended warranty, new placemats, a full detail of it, right? So instead of the typical cleaning that they do, an actual detail and a few other things, right? So a few other just knickknacks here and there, just making sure that if I'm doing an additional down payment, that I'm also getting some additional value and it's also being removed from the price of the loan there, right? So at the end of it, did I get exactly what I wanted? I did have to pay $500 more, but I received more from it. But most importantly, I did not go through the entire rigmarole that they were trying to send me through. And I stood firm. And I believe the power that we have to walk away when things are not going where they need to go is exactly how we should be looking at our strategic procurement negotiations. Now, buying a car is sometimes simple, right? You go in, you tell them what you want, you do the things that I just described to you, and you walk out with a vehicle. And our strategic negotiations, it's a little bit different. A lot more is on the line, right? We're not dealing with a couple $1,000s. We're dealing with sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? When we are able to walk away, and I'll tell you about how we determine if we're able to walk away here in a moment. But when we do this, we are enacting a psychological response on the seller side that changes their overall behavior, right? So when I left that car negotiation the first time, he was not expecting that I was completely willing to walk away because he already used his conditioning technique of trying to really get me to fall in love with that car. I drove it for the entire weekend. I drove it to the different events that I had to go to. I put my son's picture on the dashboard. I felt good in that car, but my ability to walk away starts to chip away at his other negotiation tactics because remember, everyone, as you're using your techniques, the seller is also using their techniques, right? He knew what was in my bank account. He knew that I could afford the $3,000 additional down payment, but me walking away puts other assumptions and other thoughts into his mind, right? Even though I can afford it, I want to come off as a buyer that is conscientious enough to not just spend it because I have it, right? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. I'm not going to try to fit a square into a circle hole there. In addition, I'm shifting the level of power that we have here. Yes, they have something that I want, but no, they don't have something that I need, nor are they the only seller. The car dealerships, even though they had a great program with the whole guarantee of a minimum value when I come to trade in the car a certain number of years later, right? Meaning that I can be sure that I'm walking in and able to say, all right, the minimum down payment that will be attributed to this trade-in is going to be XYZ, and I can attribute that to the purchase of another vehicle, right? That power that they had in that situation shifted because I said then the value of that program is not worth the value that you guys are asking me for. So when you're thinking about your own negotiations, you have to think about what level of power do you have with that seller and how and when can we shift that power? They're going to be looking at you and saying, well, we have the ability to do a 3-year contract with you guys and give you a great discount for locking that price in, and you're going to get amazing benefits. We're not going to raise pricing every year. You're going to get a strategic account manager, all these different bells and whistles, and they're going to pitch themselves as you need them more than they need you. But when you shift that around and you do that properly, you can ultimately say, I, as the buyer, have maintained and gained control in this conversation. Now, you can obviously do that before it's time to walk away, but if you have not yet established that, the ability to walk away is what starts to get you to that level. Let's dive in a little bit deeper here and tell you a little bit about how do we get over certain barriers, right? Many salespeople do not expect you to walk away because of these four things that you see on the screen here. There's a certain level that's holding us back, and psychologically, they know this. If we become self-aware about what's holding us back, we remove the power from the seller for them to use that against us, right? I was once negotiating with a supplier, and I was pushing hard on additional discounts as well as additional value adds and certain changes to our payment terms. At one point, I said, I'm going to have to escalate this and get it over to our legal department. because there are certain pieces and clauses in here that are just not going to work. And I think that by pushing you guys, like the seller, you guys pushing certain things, you may be in certain breaches. And they said, you know what, Brandon? That's where I end the conversation. You want to get your lawyers involved? I'll get mine involved. There's nothing else for us to talk about. What that seller was doing in that moment was using the fear of loss. He was trying to say, if you don't move forward with my terms under my conditions, you're not going to get this deal done. My response was, I would hate to see all of this go down the drain, but I am never going to move forward with an agreement that I'm not comfortable with because I'm representing my stakeholders. And if I'm not comfortable with it, I cannot recommend that they become comfortable with it either. Right. And through that conversation, I said, if you're willing to take this off the table or you're willing to stop our negotiations and not be collaborative as we bring in our legal counterparts, that is completely fine. We will table this. We will not renew for now, and we will figure out how to stay afloat without you guys. It's not going to be the end of the world without you, right? Now, a small caveat, right? You do have to make sure within your own business that it will not be the end of the world, right? You can't be negotiating with a key strategic supplier and all of a sudden say it's fine if everything falls off the table. You might be in a very difficult position if you go in that route. The other side to things, right, is when we have internal pressures. Our management, bosses, our team members are relying on us to get the deal done. They may be saying, hey, Brandon, there's a huge group of contractors coming in because we have a plant turnover happening next month. And if we don't get the contract done, we can't do that turnover in time. And therefore, the ability to walk away is almost cut down. We can't walk away because of all of those internal pressures. But once again, once we realize where those pressures are coming from, there are still going to be ways for us to operate with these techniques of walking away, still being within the bounds of the negotiation, right? We're still going to make sure that our stakeholders are happy and satisfied while still keeping all of our negotiation tools on the table. The other side to it is, let's say this, for example, I did an RFP about 2 weeks ago. And in that RFP, the bidder that was expected to win had an estimated savings of around 15%. When we went back to the stakeholder group and talked about, well, here's where we think we can save the most money if we go with this particular supplier, they responded and said, we're actually going to choose another supplier in that RFP bidder list that wasn't the cheapest, but we think that it'll be the most strategic partner moving forward. Yes, a little bit more expensive, but instead of just using them in this area, we'll be able to use them nationally. Instead of being attached to that 15% outcome, I quickly let it go. And I said, all right, how can I align these new outcomes that I'm trying to achieve with what my stakeholder group wants? I'm not going to spend a ton of time convincing them that this bidder to save 15% is the best choice, but rather I'm going to shift gears and become a little bit more collaborative and say, with the new direction that we're taking, what is the maximum benefit that I can now achieve? Right? You've given me a new set of parameters. I can walk away from that previous bidder, and now I can work with the new data that I have in order to develop new outcomes that I am not so emotionally or mentally attached to. And then the other side that you see there is the sunk cost, feeling that we've spent so much time on a negotiation that walking away would pretty much put all of that down the drain. But we all should know by this time in our careers, and if even some of you are new, the ability to wipe the slate clean sometimes gives you more advantages than continue to pour in to a sinking ship, right? There are sometimes vendor relationships, negotiations with a contract, or stakeholder projects or engagements that we're working with where, yes, we've spent a lot of time, money, and effort into them, but the moment we see that ROI dip below what that value should be for us moving forward, right? The moment we recognize that it becomes worth less getting this complete than simply pulling back, we need to then evaluate if it's better for us to simply walk away from that situation. Now, what I said before is you're going to need the tools necessary in order to properly walk away. Walking away is not something that happens on a whim. And it is not something that you should use out of emotion. And it is not necessarily something that you should use with a gut check, right? It shouldn't just feel right to walk away and you simply walk away. It has to make sense. And one of the ways that it often makes sense is what we call a Kraujic matrix. If you've used a Kraujic matrix before, I just want you to put it into the chat. And if you have an example, throw that into the chat as well. I'd be happy to talk about it, right? So first, yes, I've used a Kraujic matrix and I use it at this point. If you've never heard of a Kraujic matrix, let me describe it briefly. This is a way for us to be biased in the right way. And what I mean by be biased in the right way is being biased simply means that you are assigning a thing a certain label to make your reactions to them a little bit more streamlined. And what I mean by that is you put your suppliers into one of these buckets, and based on the bucket that they're in, you will treat them accordingly, right? So here's a couple examples. If I put a supplier into the bottleneck bucket, I'm going to treat them like a bottleneck supplier. What does that mean for us? Bottleneck suppliers means that we're spending relatively less money with them than we are with other suppliers in that category. However, they are a high risk, meaning they have a high impact to the organization. If they were to go away, it would be very difficult to operate without them. In addition, it's very difficult to replace them, right? So for us, what that could mean is that we're dealing with a supplier that has made custom parts for us, right? Or maybe they are providing a custom software solution that is vital for the upkeep and running our business properly. And if we got rid of that custom part or custom software solution, it would be very difficult for us to run our company effectively. So then we have a score attached to that that says how easy would it be to walk away from them. The higher the number, the easier it is to walk away from that particular supplier. Bottleneck suppliers, because of their high risk, it's pretty difficult to walk away. We give them about a 3 out of 10. Strategic, on the other hand, we once again treat them differently. Strategic, high spend, high impact. And similar to bottleneck, very difficult to replace. The reason why we give strategic a 4 out of 10 instead of a 3 out of 10 is because typically strategic suppliers have a little bit more leeway when it comes to how we engage with them, and we're typically engaging with them on multiple fronts. So there may be some situations with that strategic supplier that you can walk away from, and then others where you can't, but it doesn't destroy the relationship because there are multiple ways and in revenues that we're connected through, right? Non-critical, one of the easiest types of suppliers to walk away from. These are ones that we're spending very little money with and have very little impact to the organization, 8 out of 10. And even higher, 9 out of 10 for leverage suppliers simply means we're spending a lot of money with them, but they do not have a heavy impact on the organization. In my opinion, think of leverage as a lot of your facilities management style agreements, right? Your Office Depots, your Amazons, where you're doing Amazon business, getting deliveries and whatnot. There's a dozen of these types of players in the space where you can spend a lot of money with them. And if you don't get your paper shipment from Office Depot, you can simply order it from somewhere else, and your business is not going to collapse unless you absolutely use paper in your day to day, right? So once again, when we connect this back to the walk away, you're putting your suppliers into these different boxes. Now, do you need to do this formally? Realistically, no. Do you need to know what type of supplier you're dealing with at all times? Absolutely, yes. What I mean by this is the best diet, everybody, is a diet that you can stick to. And we have to sometimes be realistic with ourselves. We are very busy people, and often we're not going to sit down and say, hey, out of the 75 suppliers that I manage, I'm going to map them all out and put them into a box. Now, that's extremely helpful. I would recommend it. If you can do that, fantastic. But for those of you that can't, for those of you that may get a new supplier every single week, mentally being able to do this is going to be paramount to your own success, and not just with negotiation and walking away, but with your general supplier management, right? There are going to be things that you do with your strategic suppliers that you don't do with your non-critical. There are going to be things that you want to do with your non-critical, such as automating their processes, maybe building out catalogs, that doesn't make sense for you to do with your strategic. So having them in these boxes helps you determine how you behave and how you respond to certain things. If a bottleneck supplier comes up and tells you, we're raising prices by 25%, you can't necessarily get rid of them overnight, but you then start to think to yourself, how do I get the supplier out of here? How do I replace them? How do I move them out of my ecosystem? A strategic supplier, on the other hand, if they tell you we're boosting prices by 25%, you might say, well, why are you boosting prices by 25%? Is there a problem in your supply chain that I can help with? Are you experiencing any sort of regulations or compliance issues that have increased the pricing? Maybe we should become a little bit more transparent on how we got here and why we're here, right? Those conversations sound different and they happen differently depending on what box you're putting your suppliers into. And at any given point, you should know what type of supplier that you're dealing with. A quick note. Many of you, many of you will think that you're dealing with a strategic supplier, and sometimes that's just because you want to call your supplier strategic. You need to be honest with yourself as it relates to other suppliers in your category. Every supplier, even if your company calls them a strategic partner, they may not fall when it comes to the Krautic matrix under strategic partner. You have to be honest with yourself and then act accordingly. You have to ask yourself, can I replace the supplier? Are there other suppliers in the space with similar capabilities? How many substitutes are available for me? If I can't get it this way, can I get it this way? If they're supplying me paint, will a stain work instead? All of these questions are going to help you figure out where does your supplier land and how do you treat them accordingly. The next step, understanding your ZOPA and BOTNA. If you've ever used, and I'm not seeing enough in the chat, there are going to be some bigger opportunities for us to talk and ask a few more questions at the very end, where I wanted to hear a little bit from your experiences. But I would love to hear about your experiences and your happenings along the way. So if you have them, please put them into the chat. I'm monitoring it. I'll call it out. We can have the conversation live. You can ask questions. You can give advice to other people, right? I'm one of the experts. You guys are all of the other experts. And I guarantee you, if you have something to share, there's somebody else on this call, including myself, that would love to hear it. So throw it into the chat there if you can. ZOPA is your zone of possible agreement. All that means is you, before you step into any negotiation, know your targets, know exactly where you want to land, and what sort of optimistic and pessimistic points you also have. What that means is, going back to the car example, if I walk in, I know my target. Here's what I want to pay in terms of the total price of the car, the total cost of ownership. Here's how many months I would like to pay. Here's how where I want my interest rate to be at, and here's where I want my monthly payment to be at, right? I know all of these different negotiation points and all of these various targets. Now, what I also have, right, is how much on the seller side am I willing to move? And even though I have these targets, reasonably speaking, what's the best that I think that I can get, right? So if I go in there and I'm thinking to myself, all right, well, I want a 3.5 APR, but on best case, I get 0% APR, right? And on the worst case, I get 24% APR. Now, within that, where am I looking to agree on, right? Maybe I know that the supplier sometimes offers that 24%, but maybe that's outside of my ZOPA. Maybe I'm willing to go up to 10% APR or something along those lines, right? And maybe realistically, yes, I want to hit that 0%, but I'm fine with my target at 3%. Through that process is what you guys need to then determine is, how do your projects have a range? What does that range look like for any sort of negotiation that you're dealing with? And then have that written down, right? Don't go in there blind. Have some notes, have it categorized out, have it visually laid out so that when you're on that call or you're face-to-face negotiating, you know where you can work with. The other side to that is, you often don't need to create that ZOPA completely on your own. Go out to your team members, work with your stakeholder groups, create that cross-functional team to where, if I'm going back to the car example, right? I'm married, so I'm going to my wife as one of my stakeholders to say, all right, what's our ZOPA for how much the car should cost? Are we looking for something as cheap as $10,000? And could we go up to $30,000? What does that look like? Let's agree on it. And for your own roles, that's the process that you're going through. You're creating that cross-functional team, you're asking for the opinions, and then you're figuring out what those targets should be. Another quick caveat. We do not only negotiate price and numbers, right? We're not just there to see kind of what I talked about before, purchase price, APR, et cetera, et cetera. We're also there to negotiate other things that are a little bit less tangible, but sometimes still connected back to the financial side of things. We're there to negotiate how long the warranty is. We're there to negotiate if they're going to give us 1 or 5 included oil changes. We're there to negotiate if they can upgrade the tires before we roll off the lot. We're there to negotiate more than just the dollars. And for every single one of your negotiations, that should also be included in your ZOPA. Now, we also see on the screen here best alternative to a negotiated agreement. This is different than Zopa because the only piece here is if you land outside of your Zopa, now you need a BOTNA. It sounds like I'm speaking a different language here, I promise, but it all makes sense if you put it into practice, right? Your BOTNA is simply if we don't get anything along the lines of what we want, here's what we'll do instead. And you can establish that with the supplier as soon as you walk in. And it could be multiple things here. If I walk into that car dealership and I give them my target, right? Maybe I don't disclose my entire Zopa. We know car dealerships are going to say, "Well, it sounds like you're willing to pay up to $30,000. Let's show you a car at 29.99, right?" We're not doing that part, but we are potentially telling them what our alternates are or our walk away points, right? I could walk in and say, "Hey, here's my target. And if we can't get to that, I'm willing to wait 3 months or until you guys have different inventory in or whatever it takes in order for us to get there, right? I'm willing to walk away from a deal now if it does not work. Also, as my botnet, I'm willing to go over to the car dealership across the street. Also, maybe I'm also just willing to not buy a car right now. Maybe I'm just willing to forget the idea completely. Or maybe I'm willing to lease a vehicle, right? So I have all of these different alternatives to purchasing that car. And then depending on how that conversation is going with the supplier, with the seller, I can disclose certain botnas along the way. And I want to do that strategically, right? So before I walk away, I'm telling them, here's what will make me walk away. When I walked into that car dealership, I said, I'm only going to buy it at these terms. I'm not going to buy it in any other way, shape, or form. And by saying that, they should already have picked up on this is this guy's walk away point, you know? But strategically, what they're also going to try to do is push the envelope. They are going to try to find my Zopa there, right? So once again, $3,000 down payment, all the way down to total of $1,000 down payment to get exactly what I wanted in terms of all the other terms and conditions. They were trying to push and figure out where is this guy's pessimistic point at for his agreement. It's under 3,000. He declined that. It's under 2,500. He declined that. It's under 2,000. He declined that. His pessimistic point is still on the other end of that. And by them using their techniques, they're trying to figure out my positioning. So I don't have to tell them my Zopa. If they're a good salesperson, they're going to ask the right questions that helps them get there. But I am disclosing certain parts of my botna along the way here. And I know that certain parts of this are things that you guys already know. What I'm trying to do now is place this into the right context so that you know how to use some of these other tools, including the walk away portion. So, I said before, you're going to have various buckets that you put your suppliers into. And now I'm getting down to some of the other examples that we're working with here. So on the leverage supplier side, once again, I'm going in there with a lot of preparation. In this example, I should have my Zopa, I should have my Botna, I should have my cross-functional team involved, I should have support from my leadership, I should have all the various tools in place. And then I can confirm that this is a leverage supplier because I know that there are 3 other viable alternatives to them, but we're spending a lot of money with them. And because I know that there are these other alternatives, it should be easy to plug and play. Now, we're doing a renewal in this example. Maybe they're playing some hardball. And once again, they in this situation, they could be pushing forward a 10% price increase with a stipulation on they can sell our data, something along those lines, right? They can collect it, they can sell it, they can do everything that they want to do with it, and we don't agree. At that point, we establish which things for us would be crossing the line. We give them the option and the ability to draw that line back. And if they don't, because we know that they are a leveraged supplier, we can walk away. Now, the other parts that aren't on the screen here that we have to also consider is timing as well as criticality to the business. Do we absolutely need this thing renewed by a certain time? Are there certain stages of the negotiation that we have to reach in order to be sure that our stakeholders get what they want? And how early in the process are we starting? So, like with any good negotiation, you were starting this early enough to give yourself leeway. If you need to walk away, you have that on the table. When this doesn't work, and if you're taking notes, you probably want to write this part down, right? It doesn't work if your supplier cannot be unplugged, right? And this doesn't work if you have a renewal tied to specific business delivery items, right? And what I mean by that is you need the renewal done so that other things down your supply chain line can happen. This does work if you're doing all of the proper due diligence and you're starting this with enough time so that if you were to walk away and put things on hold for 2, even 3 weeks, that you're not at risk of running into either an auto renewal or just completely out of time for the negotiation. In this example, we're walking away from that SaaS supplier with months of negotiation down the pipeline here, right? We have a very big runway that we can work with. We can say, hey, the contract renews in 3 months. Here are all the terms. You've listed some that I cannot agree to. You're not budging on those things. And in my position here, what I would then say is, I'm going to walk away and I'm going to evaluate our options and determine if this renewal is right for us, right? What that does is, one, you're sending a very clear example that you don't need them, that they need you a little bit more. So you're specifically shifting that power dynamic. The other side is psychologically, even if you say the words that I just said in terms of we are going to consider if this renewal is right for us, that is a 1 foot out the door, and nothing scares a salesperson whose commission might be tied to this renewal more than someone saying 1 foot is out the door. And this is slightly different than already having fully walked away because, once again, you're giving them the chance. This is a negotiation tool and not something that you just do in order to fit into your process. What I mean by that is conditioning. And if you guys have heard this word before, and for those of you that have not heard of conditioning, conditioning is simply saying certain words, showing certain behaviors in order to get the person on the other side of that negotiation to think and to feel a certain type of way. If I'm saying we're going to see if this renewal is right for us, the conditioning that I have there is now the fear and the feeling that they have is fear of losing the contract renewal, right? That's conditioning them that says they need to step up, they need to do a little bit better, they need to try harder, they need to understand a little bit more about what my ZOPA looks like, right? That is conditioning. Likewise, if this was a strategic supplier, conversation might sound a little bit differently. I might not say we need to figure out if this renewal is right for us. My conditioning stepping into that meeting would be slightly different. So listen to how I would talk to a strategic supplier. I would really love to go back to my team with a win-win story to tell. I see you as a strategic partner that I am enthusiastic to work with far off into the future. I don't want to create a narrative with my stakeholders that paints you in a bad light. I want for you to win, and therefore I want for our team to win by working with you. And right now, it does not look like a win for us. It looks as though you guys are not respecting us the same way that we respect you. Is there something that we can do to make sure that when I go back to my stakeholder team, back to my directors, back to my leaders, where they are happy with the news that we've given? In my opinion, what that would look like for us is if we were able to do XYZ within the contract. And if you can do that, we're creating a really good win story. Because what I don't want our leaders to start thinking about is that this renewal is not going to be worthwhile, or they're not going to get the ROI out of this renewal as they should, right? So, end scene there, a lot of what I said there was on purpose to condition their mindsets in multiple ways. I'm using a lot of collaborative language. I'm using language that says we're on the same team. And I'm using language that says, I want you to be the superstar here. All of that says the ball is in your court, supplier. Are you willing to step up, make some changes, reevaluate, or do we have to kick you out? And are you going to force the client to walk away? Noting that the client doesn't want to walk away. You have a customer that wants to be here, and you're the one that's either going to make sure that they stay or you're going to push them out and end the partnership there. That is why the CrowdJig matrix and putting our suppliers in those buckets is so important. I'm going to talk to that leverage supplier very differently than I'm talking to that strategic supplier overall. So let's dive into a little bit more of the example of that strategic supplier, mainly because I want to give you guys a little bit more of the tool sets on how to use that walk away situation. So I already talked about them being a critical provider. The main difference here, right, is that we're not typically in these situations walking away entirely. With the language that I used in that previous example, it's more like a tactical pause that we have there, right? Um, we can give the fear of walking away. We can hold things off. There are times when we use the walk away strategy because we are trying to work with timing and get that on our side, right? A quick example of that is we know that our supplier's financial quarter ends at the end of next month. Right. So we already have a month and a half before their quarter ends. And we know that our salespeople need to capture a certain amount of revenue in that quarter. So in order to use this the right way, I could say, our terms are not exactly where we need them to be. They should be here. Let us take this back to our team. We'll see if we can change the scope in our terms and what we're willing to accept, but it might take us some time. I'm going to use that as a tactical pause. I'm going to potentially occasionally check in with the supplier to see if they've made any progress on being able to accept our terms. But I am still going to say, well, we're paused on getting any of our requirements changed right now. I'm going to get as close to that quarter end as possible while potentially getting all the other ducks in a row, meaning I've gotten legal approval on the contract, I've gotten finance approval depending on what type of deal goes through, right? So maybe I've talked to finance about what the ZOPA looks like. I say to them, it could look as bad as this, but it could look as good as this. Are you able to approve both sides and anything in between so that I know as the negotiator how much I have to work with, right? I'm going to the leaders of the deal, the project sponsors, and I'm saying, here's what's currently on the table. Here's what we're thinking about taking off. Here's what the vendor wants to change. So in the background, I'm making sure that all of what I am putting together, I'm making sure that my entire tool set is aligned to and agreed to by my cross-functional team. But strategically, from the vendor's perspective, I've taken a pause and I'm thinking about if this deal is right to go through. In addition, I'm also comparing this to the timing of my actual contract renewal, right? Um, let's say, for example, we miss the contract signing date and the contract signing date was at the end of the month, right when their financial quarter ends. We then need to determine who is that more disadvantageous to, right? Is it going to be to us as the buyer, or are we in an agreement where they can't simply turn off what we have, right? Maybe we have software that simply says, all right, you're going to do a month-to-month renewal as per the contract if this goes over. So therefore, we take away, or we at least put the supplier at risk for taking away that revenue in that quarter that they're trying to capture it in, but we still get continuity of supply, right? So that would solve some of our problems, still give us a little bit of time, put the fear into them that they can't lock in that revenue unless they agree because we won't be, SOL, for lack of a better word, to make sure that the deal happens. So the tactical pause is only tactical within the context of the negotiation of how you're trying to use it, but we do this more with strategic suppliers than anyone else. It does also sometimes apply to those bottleneck ones, but typically if a tactical pause is with a bottleneck supplier, it'll be different than the tactical pause with a strategic supplier. On the bottleneck side, sometimes we're doing that so that we can change the scope, maybe make it a little bit more simpler, maybe reduce the level of risk and the level of impact that we have there. But either way it goes, we're timing that tactical pause out with other things going on in the industry and within the space overall. Let's figure out as you're thinking about that walk away, if you have this checklist down. And if this is something that's valuable to you guys, this is the slide that I would say screenshot it, take it with you. Because at a certain level, these are what it will help you determine is walking away the right strategy for me. First one, do I think that I am actually getting everything that I can get out of this agreement, right? Do I think that the supplier is unwilling to move anymore? Do I think that they are unwilling to budge on any terms? If they're unwilling to give any sort of value adds, am I there, right? If I'm not there, maybe I do use the walkaway position to get them to push further. Now, if I am there, if they say, hey, Brandon, this is fair, we can't push anymore, you're going to bankrupt us if we give you any more, probably not the best idea to use the walkaway strategy. Because at a certain point, you also have to realize the supplier, the seller, they also have a ZOPA. And if what you're asking for is beyond their pessimistic point, right? It's lower than the lowest thing that they can agree to by stipulation, by the requirements of their company, walking away is not going to make things much better. It might make things a lot worse. Leadership alignment. Do you have the support of your team and the people that are going to be signing that check? And I would almost say that that is one of the most important things that you need to do. You cannot walk away unless we're all in agreement of what that looks like and how that works. Is your alternative plan a truly viable alternative plan, or is it some pie in the sky type situation where, yeah, if things don't work out, we could do this? No, the BOTNA needs to be real. It needs to be something that you can act on and not out of theory. And at times, you need to even attach an action plan with that BOTNA before you go into it so that you understand what roadblocks or obstacles you will have to overcome if you have to pull that BOTNA out of your pocket. Once again, supplier category, making sure that you're dealing with the supplier in the right CrowdStrike matrix, and then acting accordingly. And then the clear rationale. Can you explain the why you're walking away to your team? The reason that's important is because I don't want you to take this and think about this as a tool that um, can, like I said in the very beginning, just be done on a gut check, right? This is not a, this can be a dangerous activity if done incorrectly, and you need to be able to stand behind it 100%. And part of that process is being able to adequately and accurately give the why this is happening. Right. And you should be able to explain that to yourself. You should be able to explain it to your team. You should be able to explain it to the supplier. Everyone involved, you need to have that clear why. All right. So that's the checklist. Make sure you're going through that. And I'm going to recap a few of these things here. We have about 10 minutes left, everybody. Feel free to throw your questions into the chat. Hopefully, I've explained this in detail enough so that really the goal of the hour that we spent here today is a refresher for those that did not fully understand Zopas or Botnas or did not think to themselves that they weren't using it, but then to also give you this other tool set, right? So I understand if there's a ton of things going on there. So we do have a question that came in here. I'll get to the question right after. Well, I'll do it now, and then we'll go into some of the benefits. I'll let you guys kind of do what people do. You're reading the slide now. That's fine for me. We'll go over to the question that came in. Um, and this is from Nikithia, who says, Hi, these are great insights. Thank you for an amazing session. They have a question as how can these concepts help a grad student in their early career? I understand these techniques can be used in salary and perks negotiation, but as a supply chain student, how can I begin talking about these concepts? Um, the last part of your question may have confused me slightly, but if I think about like this in any situation in terms of learning, getting into a job, or any of those moments, I would say that when you're negotiating things like salary, you're negotiating things like position, having this idea is perfect, right? So for any job that you're walking into, it's always great to know your optimistic and pessimistic salary ranges, but most importantly, the target that you're searching for, and then making sure, of course, that target is backed up by benchmarking information. Like we said before, that target is going to be key for how you walk in. And if you take my car purchase as the example, I walked in there armed with data. I walked in there knowing what type of car, how much that car was worth, the blue book value, and then also what other people were selling that car for. As a student, one of the things that I would often urge you to do, especially as you go into some of your first interviews, is making sure that your experience of life, you can connect it back to some of these concepts. So my advice to you would be two things. One, have these details ready when it's time to talk salary and negotiation, right? Have them ready. Have that range, have that ZOPA, have that target, have that BOTNA, right? So in the BOTNA situation, you would simply say, well, I have alternate job offers on the table, and realistically, you should have them, right? You should have other job offers in the running. You're not ever just applying to one job, and you can use that to your advantage, right? You can talk in a way that says to that recruiter, I don't necessarily need this job, but I really want it. I want this to work out. Here's why. I have these alternatives, but here's why this is the best one. I'm not willing to go anything less than this, but here's my target. And what would help me, if you really think that I'm a good fit, is putting me at this range, which is my optimistic point of view. So that's the first step. The second one is if you're thinking about how to then demonstrate this skill in the interview and you don't yet have that experience in a professional setting, take experiences from your personal life and be using these concepts in your personal life to where when it's time to talk about it, you can say, no, I've never negotiated a multi-million dollar deal, but here's what happened when I went into Sephora and I negotiated a 50% discount on a makeup artist working with me for this event. Something along those lines, right? That says, here's something that happened in my life that I was able to negotiate. And what I will say is you only get what you negotiate. You don't get anything more. And the best thing that you can do is at least ask for it. We were training a client last week and we were I was with a team of people and we were at the hotel where the client was kind of housing all their people and we needed somewhere to park and prep. And one of the things that I noticed was that the client, because they were having this huge leadership summit, had booked out all of the meeting rooms in the hotel. And I noticed this by just walking around and seeing their name on all the doors there. And so I said, well, we need a place to practice and prep. I went up to the front desk. I told them, here's who I am. Here's what we're trying to do. We're with the company that's primarily staying here. I noticed that one of these rooms is completely empty. Do you mind if we stay in there and then we are willing to leave if somebody walks in? I know that's a simple example. They said yes. We were able to get in that room, set up some chairs, some projectors, and really practice and rehearse and all that. But I was the only one in our group that was willing to ask the question. Everybody else said, Brandon, those rooms are full. They're planning to have something in there. Let's not bother them. And I said, you only get what you ask for, right? You go into a restaurant and they say, hey, I know that you really wanted outdoor seating, but it's not available. Can we sit you inside? What are you going to ask for? Right? Is there the possibility that, hey, we'll put our order in on the inside, we'll wait for something to open up outside, and if it does open up before our food comes, we can transition to the outside? You get what you ask for, and there's always situations in our daily lives that feature negotiation, and that's where you pull your experiences from, especially if you're in those early career interviews. And for me, whenever I hire somebody and they don't have a lot of actual experience in that space, being able to see how they relate it to their own lives is extremely valuable. I know that they are a sharp thinker, and ultimately, I have a lot more trust and confidence that the skill here will come natural. So I hope that answers your question. And I am definitely open to other questions in the comment here. Could you suggest how best can I speak about negotiation skills in any conversation or interview? Give examples and give them in a way that is clear, concise, and organized. So if you're in an interview, always find a way where you have real negotiation techniques that you are connecting back with your real life examples and have a planned way of speaking about them. Meaning, don't just blurt out stuff. Oh, this one time this happened, and then this one time this happened. No, every time that you talk about something, you have a plan on where that conversation is going and why you are telling them that story and how it can connect back to them. You're trying to get hired at a tech company. Have some tech examples, perhaps, right? Tech examples that connect back to people and people management. The main concept is that you are demonstrating the ability for you to synergize topics and thoughts in a way that every procurement professional should. Procurement professionals have to spend a lot of time talking to leadership, talking to stakeholders, and talking to suppliers. If you are able to demonstrate that by connecting it in ways that say, I do this every day and I'm conscious about it, I'm not just doing it to do it, but I'm thinking about that process, I'm enacting it, that is a great way to show that you are adept and skilled naturally and a better fit for the job, even if you have 0 years of experience. So thank you for asking that follow-up question as well. Other questions in the chat, completely fine. But once again, just quickly going over the benefits here. We only have about 3 minutes. You guys already read the slide, I'm sure, while I was answering the question. But the main concept of walking away, it gives you the power. You get better offers. You get to think about the deal a little bit more and essentially come up with other advantages or other ideas. And overall, your ability to walk away, it drives respect. You're not desperate. You don't need the deal, but you are a problem solver. Walking away does not mean you're giving up. And when you demonstrate that to your suppliers and especially your leadership, they know that you're not going to simply say, supplier is charging us 20% more and we took it. It's like, no, they know that you're going to be able to get the job done. And that is most important because imagine that the stakeholder is one that is not familiar and necessarily required to work with procurement. If they don't know that you can have their best interest in mind and get the job done properly, the next time they reach out to procurement, they're reaching out when they're ready for the contract to be signed and not when they're ready to negotiate with the supplier. They need to know that you can stand strong and firm in all the beliefs that you have and your ability to negotiate properly. Take a screenshot of this. We ran a little bit of out of time, everybody. This is what I want you to take away with, right? I want you, after all this is over, to think about when you can use this in your own worlds. Pick a deal, pick the walkaway point and the alternative outcome, and think about this for a future one and a past one. For the past one, I want you to think about, was there a point that I could have and should have walked away sooner? And for the future one, think about, is there the moment? Is there going to be a moment in that negotiation when I should walk away, right? A few other quick things here. Make sure, once again, you have that team alignment, you're documenting things, you're communicating them, and then you're measuring the conversation and the results. Imagine you walk away, things change, and your next step from there is to document how much closer to that point did we get. Lastly, a few pieces here. If they call back, you've walked away, a few quick notes. You are staying composed, you are not giving in immediately, and you are spending more time listening than you are anything else. And if they don't call you back and they say, hey, you walked away and we're done with you, use your BOTNA, right? Figure out what obstacles you need to avoid and then work with your team to develop that discipline. Final takeaways, do it when it makes sense, everybody. It demands your preparation, but it can give you the power you need to succeed in your negotiations. I'm going to pause. We're right at time. Kathy, if you're all right with it, I can send out this presentation to you, and if you want to share it with the members, I'd be completely fine with that. There are a few slides. I mean, this is the final slide, just so that everybody knows, but there are a few slides we didn't get to spend a ton of time on, such as the checklist slide. What are your thoughts, Kathy, on getting this out to participants?
Oh, definitely. If you could send it to me, what I'll do is I always do a follow-up email to everybody and we'll include it in that.
All right, sounds good. So everybody, you're going to get this presentation. If you ever want to use this as one of your tools, or right, if you want to take this presentation back to your teams and say, hey, Brandon talked about this. Here's something that I think we all should know. I'm completely fine with that. Note that this is technically the property of ISM, right? So don't use it in any way that ISM does not want you to use it. I did develop and make this presentation, but this is all for learning purposes. All right. You get this as a benefit for being in ISM and a benefit of being a member. So hopefully you continue to enjoy those member benefits. And Kathy, I'll let you take it away with our outro.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks again, Brandon, for a very, very in-depth presentation. And I want to thank our audience for joining us today too. And we will be getting out the recording for this presentation out later today once we get it posted on our YouTube channel. Thanks, Brandon. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you all. Have a good day.